Next day he was up and about, ready to get back to work. But the hoarseness had not improved. Nor was it better the next day, nor the next. Dr. Manning Brown, the local throat specialist, was called in. He said something about aphonia and asked for permission to call in other specialists. They came in droves, each with a different theory. There was even a European specialist who was visiting in a nearby town and came to Hopkinsville to see the interesting case. Weeks slipped into months. Spring came, and summer. The hoarseness remained. Edgar became suddenly aware, one day, that his condition was incurable. The doctors weren't visiting him with any idea of being helpful. Cly regarded him as a curiosity. Something one of them said as he came into Dr. Brown's office, and something in the way Dr. Brown introduced the newcomer, tore the veil away one morning. Edgar saw himself as others saw him, a man who had lost his voice, and would never again be able to speak above a whisper. For a while he found it impossible to give up hope. He was in the habit of expecting to get well. It was hard to break himself of the thought. For the faith he held in the doctors, he found himself substituting a belief in miracles. There is a river. It was only gradually, through acquiring the habit, that he was able to face the truth. He had to have a job. That was the main force in conditioning him to his new environment. Salesmanship was impossible for a man without a voice, so was clerking, so, it seemed, was everything he had ever done. He could go back to the farm, but he recoiled from the thought. He needed the town. He was lonely, depressed, frightened. He wanted to be near lots of people, even though he couldn't speak with them, or join with them in the things they did. He needed them. Left alone, there were problems he carried to face, and he was not yet prepared to meet them. The local photographer, W.R. Bowles, solved the problem of work. He averred a job as apprentice. Edgar accepted. It seemed to be just what he wanted. He would be with lots of people, but without the necessity of speaking WDTH. Mr. Bowles would do that. He would learn a trade, which, whether his voice ever came back or not, would be a means of livelihood. Another of the problems he had to face disappeared as soon as he took the job. Gertrude was delighted when she heard what he was doing. She had always been interested in photography and painting. She took photographs herself and tinted them. "We can have our own studios," she said excitedly. "I'll receive the people and tend to all the business of talking with them and showing them samples and prices, and you can take the pictures and do dye developing. I can do tint-ing, too." He nodded, surprised. He had known that the loss of his voice made no difference in her feeling for him. But he had not been able to shake off the conviction that she was justified in breaking the engagement, and therefore ought to do it. Somehow it had seemed to him that it was right that there is a river he be an outcast. That she not only did not think so, but was identifying herself with his misfortune and turning it into a blessing for them both, was a mystery of compassion and grace that numbed him. It had never occurred to him that she should do something for him. He had been solely concerned with doing everything for her. But though she drew him closer to her, the sense of ostracism remained. There was a third problem. In the quiet of the studio darkroom, in the solitude of his walks to and from the hill, in the time of prayer before going to sleep, he was haunted by God. Had his voice been taken from him because it was meant to be the voice of a preacher? Was he being punished for not heeding the call to serve God? The angel who had appeared to him when he was a child, who had directed him from the farm to Hopkinsville, had she sent him on a mission he had faded to fulfill? She had said to him, "Your prayers have been heard. Tell me what you would like most of all, so that I may give it to you." He had answered, "Most of all I would seek to be helpful to others, and especially to children when they are sick." Then she had disappeared, and the next day she had helped him / his lessons. Why had she helped him with his lessons? If she had not meant him to study and be a preacher or, as his mother had thought, a doctor. But these things had been impossible. He had done the best he knew how. He had taught Sunday school, formed a mission group, and tried to live like a true Christian. Was there something else he should have done? Always there had been the feeling within him that he should spend all his time helping other people. But it was impossible to do that and make a having at the same time, unless you were a preacher or a doctor. The disciples of There Is a River Jesus just left their work and followed him. But if he did that, after whom would he follow? When he asked his mother about it, she tried to reassure him. "TV never thought that your voice was meant to be that of a preacher," she said. "Preachers are all right, but they are the sort of people who expect virtue of other people. You're the sort who expects virtue of yourself. There's a difference. Not that preachers aren't all right. Most of THFTM are fine people. But I never could really think of you as a preacher. You seem more like a good Christian." A good Christian is too busy being virtuous himself to worry about whether his neighbor is keeping the law. She talked some more. She talked quite a bit, in fact, going on and on about things and people and duty and serve ice, until suddenly he realized that she was not answering his question. She was just talking, and she was worried. Worried and puzzled and frightened, as he was. Everyone in Hopkinsville went to Holland's Opera House. When Hart the Laugh King came to town, Hart was a HYP. Noticed. He got his laughs by putting people under and telling them to do ridiculous things, such as play hopscotch, imitate fish, climb non-existent ladders, crochet imaginary doilies, etc. People loved to watch their cousins, friends, and enemies go through these routines, and when volunteers failed, Hart would sit on the stage and hypnotize the audience, swaying back and forth in his chair while he monotonously droned, "Sleep, sleep, sleep." Afterward he would go through the audience, looking for those who had succumbed. He would speak Quidditch to them, make passes with his hands before their faces, and they would awaken. There is a river. Usually he asked for a group to go up on the stage, a class, he called it. Those who failed to react to his passes and words were dismissed, the others amused the audience. Once Edgar went up with a group of his friends, but he was dismissed. Hart had a professional troupe, including a man who, when noticed, was instructed to remain rigid. Then a large rock was placed on his chest, and another member of the troupe, using a blacksmith's hammer, pounded on the rock until it broke. There were other acts, equally spectacular, and a special demonstration which did for Hart what the parade did for the circus. A local volunteer was given an object and told to hide it anywhere in town. Then, Hart, in a carriage drawn by 2 horses, with a blindfold over his eyes and a man on either side of him, each holding a wrist, would retrace the man's route, telling the driver what turns to take, and eventually finding the object. He never failed in these searches. Nor did he ever succeed in convincing the skeptical that it wasn't a fake. Hart usually stayed in town from 10 days to 2 weeks, leaving when the crowds began to dwindle. He was a medium-sized man, with light brown, wavy hair, and hazel green eyes that seemed uncommonly bright and alert. He wore no robes, used no lights or other paraphernalia, and credited his powers to the new science of hypnotism and clairvoyance. Hypnotism at the time was enjoying a fad throughout the country. The French academicians had spumed Ms. Mer and his theories, and although many reputable scientists had worked with hypnotism thereafter, VMDR such titles as somnambulism and magnetic therapy, it had failed to win a clean reputation with science and medicine. In the United States it had both enthusiasts and exploiters. A New York physician, Dr. John P. Quackenboss, said that hypnotism there is a river was the medicine of the future, which would cure every illness by directing the unconscious mind of the seifra to remove the cause and heal the wound. Happy Smiley, Nevada, Missouri. A school of suggestive therapeutics was established by S.A. Weltmer with correspondence courses for those who could not attend in person. Every theater in the country, from time to time, featured a professor who offered to put anyone in the audience under his power. Hart was not a therapist by trade, but he was a thorough-going showman. When he heard from some of the town's people about Edgar's trouble, he accepted it as a challenge. For $200, he said, he would cure the hoarseness. If he did not succeed, he would accept nothing for his efforts. Edgar's friends urged him to accept. Dr. M. Annin G. Brown smiled and said, "Why not?" The squire thought it was a good idea. He had never forgotten how Edgar had once cured himself by prescribing a poultice. "Let him put you to sleep and see what happens," he said. "It can't do any harm." The experiment was conducted in Dr. Brown's office. Edgar sat in an easy chair and did his best to cooperate. Hart began talking, waved his hands a little, then selected a shiny object from Dr. Brown's instrument tray. "Look at this," he said. "Watch it closely. You are going to sleep now, to sleep, to sleep, sleep." When next Edgar was aware of what was going on, they were all smiling at him. Dr. Brown, the squire, and Hart. "Say something," Hart said. Edgar spoke. "Did I go under all right?" he asked. His voice was a hoarse whisper. It had not changed. The smiles faded. "You talked quite normally under the spell," Dr. Brown said. "Good as I've ever heard you," the squire said. "There is a river." "You were fine," Hart said, "but you didn't take the post suggestion. We'll try it again, after you've had a rest. I'm sure it can be done. You talked, that's the important thing." He smiled again. The others nodded and also smiled. Next time the post suggestion would probably take effect. But it didn't. They tried that afternoon, and when Edgar awoke he was still hoarse, though he had talked again. While under, they asked him how his throat felt. Dr. Brown examined it. There was no change in its condition. It seemed normal, as it had seemed to be during all the time of the affliction. "He gets to the second stage of hypnosis," Hart said, "and then something happens. He won't go beyond it to the third stage, where he would take post-suggestion. But I'm sure he will eventually. We'll keep trying." Hart was on his mettle now. Everyone in town knew about the experiments, and the local newspaper printed accounts of them. Professor William Giraro, who taught psychology at South Kentucky College, asked permission to attend the meetings. He was a small man, an Italian with large, deep-set eyes and a mustache. He was quiet while the hypnotizing proceeded, making notes and occasionally asking a question of Hart. In the end, Hart had to give up. Theatrical bookings took him away from Hopkinsville. And although he returned for another try whenever he was in the vicinity, he admitted that he had failed. "He won't take post-suggestion," he told Giraro. "He won't go beyond the second stage." Giraro wrote an account of the experiments and sent it, with some clippings from the Hopkinsville New Era, to Dr. Quackenboss in New York. Dr. Quackenboss expressed interest in the case, entered into correspondence with Giraro. "There is a river. And one day in the autumn turned UO in Hopkinsville, ready to try his skill on Edgar. He was a quick-moving, sharp-featured man, with a kindly, though carat-L attitude toward his patient. He asked a lot of questions, listened to the squire's account of Edgar's childhood experiences, took copious notes, and then began his experiments. He had no more success than Hart. Edgar would not go beyond the second stage. He would not take post-suggestion. In a final effort, Dr. Quackenboss set about inducing a deep sleep. A very deep sleep. A very, very deep sleep. Edgar slept for 24 hours, impervious to all efforts to waken him. Everyone was frightened, and most of the doctors in town gathered for consultation. When the patient awoke, it was naturally as if it were morning. He said he felt fibby, though his voice was no better. 4 days thereafter he could not sleep at all, except in cat naps. Then he got over it, and Dr. Quackenboss, relieved but still puzzled, left. From New York he wrote to Giraro that in thinking over his experiences in Hopkinsville he was convinced that there was a solution to the case. At the point where Edgar refused to take further suggestion, he seemed to take Dioge. of things himself, Quackenboss said. If I hypnotist were to suggest, at that point, that the patient talk about his own case, something interesting might result. Such things had been reported in France many years before. Patients under hypnosis showed powers of clairvoyance. Whether or not there was anything to it was problematical, but the chance was worth the effort. The only hypnotist in Hopkinsville was A1C Lane, A.F. Bin-Carrot Frailman, whose wife ran the millinery shop where Annie Casey, Edgar's sister, worked. Lane was not in good health. He kept books for his wife and, to pass Tim Carrot there is a river. Studied suggestive therapeutics and osteopathy by means of correspondence courses. He had followed the accounts of the experiments in Dr. Brown's office with the greatest interest. When he learned from Annie that her brother and Giraro were looking for a hypnotist, he begged for a chance to try his skill. Edgar was willing, but his parents objected. He had been losing weight ever since the first experiment. He was nervous, fretful, high-strung. The squire, at first hopeful of a cure, had become convinced that hypnotism was no more beneficial than medicine. First we had the doctors coming, one after another, poking at him as if he was a sick sow. He said to his wife, "Now, these hypnotists are doing the same thing. They'll drive the boy CRA2Y. He's not well," the mother said. "He's not eating or sleeping." Edgar asked for a compromise. Let Lane try one experiment, following the suggestion made by Dr. Quackenboss. If this did not bring results, he would submit to no more hypnotizing. Reluctantly they agreed. Annie brought Lane to the house and introduced him. He was a wisp of a man, weighing hardly 120 pounds, with greying hair and a small mustache. He was somewhere between 35 and 40, though his apparent ill health made it hard to judge. He was anxious to make the test as soon as possible. The date was set for the following Sunday afternoon, March 31st, 1901. Giraro could not attend. Lane arrived about 2:30. The girls had finished the dinner dishes and gone out. Edgar and his father and Modia were in the parlor. Edgar suggested that he put himself to sleep as he did when sleeping on his books, and that when he was apparently TMDR, Lane there is a river make the attempt to talk to him. He had discovered, he told Lane, that no matter what the hypnotist did, it was his own thought that made him go to sleep. Lane said that the more Edgar could do of his own volition, the more they might accomplish. He agreed with the idea of self-hypnosis, or, as he called it, auto-hypnosis. Edgar lay down on the family couch, a horsehair sofa that had been part of his grandmother Casey's wedding suite. He put himself to sleep. Lane, watching, saw the breathing deepen. There was a long sigh, then the body seemed to sleep. The squire sat in a chair nearby. His wife, nervous, stood up. Lane began to talk in a low, soothing voice, suggesting that Edgar see his body and describe the trouble in the throat. He suggested that Edgar speak in a normal tone of voice. In a few minutes Edgar began to mumble. Then he cleared his throat and began to speak in a clear, unafflicted voice. "Yes," he said, "we can see the body. Take it down," Lane said to the squire. The squire looked at him helplessly. The nearest pencil was in the kitchen, tied to the grocery list. "In the normal state," Edgar went on, "this body is unable to speak due to a partial paralysis of the inferior muscles of the vocal cords produced by nerve strain. This is a physiological condition producing a physical effect. This may be removed by increasing the circulation to the affected parts by suggestion while in this unconscious condition. The circulation to the affected parts will now increase," Lane said, "and the condition will be removed." Edgar was silent. They watched his throat. The squire leaned over and further loosened his son's shirt. Gradually, the upper part of the chest, then the throat, turned pink. "There is a river." The pink deepened to rose. The rose became a violent red. 10, 15, 20 minutes passed. Edgar cleared his throat again. "It is all right now," he said. "The condition is removed. Make the suggestion that the circulation return to normal, and that after that the body awaken. The circulation will return to normal," me said. "The body will then awaken." They watched while the red faded back through rose to pink. The skin resumed its normal color. Edgar wakened, sat up, and reached for his handkerchief. He coughed and spat blood. "Hello," he said tentatively. Then he grinned. "Hey," he said. "I can talk. TM all right." His mother wept. His father seized his hand and shook it again and again. "Good boy. Good boy. Good boy," he said. Hay went into the kitchen to write down what had been said. The square gave his version, Lane gave his. Edgar kept trying his voice. His mother busied herself with the coffee pot, smiling and drying her eyes as she bustled back and forth between the pantry and the stove. "This is the greatest thing that ever happened to you, Edgar," Lane said. "But it may be the greatest thing that's happened to the rest of us, too. If you can do this for yourself, why can't you do it for others? It shouldn't be any more difficult for you to see another man while you're asleep than it was to see yourself." "Maybe I was just reading my own mind," Edgar said. "Don't they say that there is a record in the mind of every thing that goes on in the body?" "He did it before," the squire said. "He saw himself when he was hit with a ball and prescribed a poultice." Lane nodded. He had heard the tale. But he also saw books that were placed under his head. "There is a river," he said, and afterward he could see the pages of the books in his mind. Why couldn't he see other people's bodies if they were before him, and tell what was wrong with them? "I'm willing to try," Edgar said. He felt grateful to Lane, and so happy that he could not have refused him anything within his power. "Tomorrow," Lane said. "We'll try it tomorrow, on me. I've been ailing with stomach trouble for years. I've had all sorts of doctors look at me. I know their diagnosis. I'll be able to tell whether you are describing the right symptoms and how close you come to the right land of treatment." "Sounds crazy to me," Edgar said, "but I'll try it." He laughed. He was so happy and relieved that he was ready to attempt anything, believe anything, do anything. When Lane left, his mother said, You may lose your voice again if you try what Mr. Lane suggests. Edgar shook his head. I don't think so, he said. If I have the power to help myself, then it can't be wrong to try and use it to aid someone else. His mother was pleased. He had answered her in the language of morals, though she had not brought up such a question. I just wanted to hear you say it, she said. I feel that way too. Remember, I've often thought about you as a doctor, and we've always believed there was a reason for your experiences. This may be the answer. The squire finished lighting a cigar and arranging the fire at its end. He'll cure anybody, he said. I'll bet on it. Edgar looked at his mother. Don't forget to thank God for this miracle, she said. It was he who performed it. Next afternoon Lane arrived with a series of questions there is a river had written concerning his condition. Edgar declined to read them. They wouldn't mean anything to me anyhow, he said. As on the previous day, he put himself to sleep. Lane sat by, holding a pad and pencil. When Edgar woke up, Lane waved the pad at him gleefully. You went all over me, he said. Gave me a perfect diagnosis, told me how I feel, and what to do, medicines, a diet, and a set of exercises. If it works, our fortunes are made. Edgar looked at what Lane had written down. There were names of parts of the body, names of medicines and foods, and instructions for exercises. How could I tell you these things? He stopped, realizing suddenly that his voice was still with him, still normal.